This is All India Radio. You will now hear comments from the press. Business Line in its editorial titled Rebooting Banking says, after inheriting a banking system that was staggering under the weight of undisclosed non-performing assets, NPAs, the incumbent government led by the RBI did manage to force banks to disclose evergreen loans and provision for them. A new bankruptcy code was legislated to allow lenders to take charge of the resolution process. But beyond this, most of the energies have gone into operational issues at public sector banks, PSBs, and scrounging up capital to keep them afloat. While investors and depositors can take heart from the worst of this NPA crisis being behind them, they have very little assurance that a similar one will not recur in future. To prevent an encore of the NPA crisis, structural reforms at PSBs are imperative. The credit appraisal and risk management systems, which led to them concentrating the loans in a handful of borrowers, need drastic overhaul. RBI recently imposed tighter curbs on the group level and firm level exposures of banks, capping them at 40% and 20% respectively of Tier 1 capital. But such limits cannot substitute for the PSB's lack of in-house talent in credit and project appraisal, which needs urgent fixing. RBI needs to work on internal early warning systems that leverage analytics to head off credit bubbles too. Strict enforcement action needs to be taken against bankers who willingly colluded with corporate borrowers to evergreen loans. There is also need for a thorough overhaul of recruitment policies at PSBs, greater accountability from the top managements and boards, and performance-linked compensation. Financial Express in its editorial titled "A CEO is responsible for risk" says, though the problems associated with the IL and FS default and its loans of over rupees 100,000 crore are still very large, there can be little doubt that the deft handling of the situation by the government and the RBI ensured the country's financial system didn't freeze up and there was no contagion despite the IL and FS exposure across various sectors. It is estimated that mutual funds have trimmed NBFC's exposure to 27% of AUM from 34% in August 2018, with exposure to NBFC commercial paper down 40%. But there is a need to be watchful since mutual funds have a rupees 320,000 crore exposure to NBFCs, including housing finance companies, and rupees 130,000 crore of this matures over the next 3 months. It is in this context that the central bank has asked NBFCs to appoint chief risk officers, CROs, and to ensure that they are insulated from various pressures. So, for instance, any premature transfer, removal of the CRO is to be intimated to RBI's Department of Non-Banking Supervision. Similarly, the NBFC's Risk Management Committee and or board is to meet the CRO once a quarter without the NBFC's MD CEO being present. All credit products are to be vetted by the CRO, and the CRO will even have voting power if he or she is one of the decision makers in the credit sanction process. Risk management is part of the NBFC's job. Whether it does it through a risk officer is its internal matter. If RBI feels not enough risk mitigation is being done, it needs to tighten the rules, ask for more provisioning or other mitigation steps. The Indian Express in its editorial titled Masala for Thought says the state government-backed Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund Board raised rupees 2,150 crore from the international markets last week through a masala bond offering, which is essentially debt issued to overseas investors in rupees or the local currency. Borrowings by these special purpose vehicles provide an off-budget mechanism or escape clause to states to circumvent the restrictions imposed on borrowings both in India and abroad, especially after the FRBM law came into force. For many investors, these are attractive pickings as these borrowings are guaranteed by the state governments and with the comfort of escrow mechanisms. To be fair, after the higher resource transfers following the 14th Finance Commission's recommendations, much of the burden of building and developing infrastructure entailing huge capital expenditure and with a longer paycheck period has fallen on states. That has been amplified by the slowdown in the economy and the consequent decline in revenues. However, the spate of borrowings by sub-sovereign entities also serves to highlight the potential risk of rising contingent liabilities of many states. What has fueled concern is not just the growing recourse to off-budget borrowings both at the federal and the state levels in India, but the lack of transparency and classification of risk related to these explicit liabilities and the lack of adequate provisions for future repayment. Those were the comments from the